Jack sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside him. The faint ticking of the clock on the nightstand was the only sound breaking the silence, its rhythm slowly driving him mad. His fingers tightened around the sheets, knuckles white with the tension that had been building for weeks. Emily had left him, but not in the way he expected. She had said it was for me time, a break, a chance to find herself, a weekend away to clear her head before they began their family life. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had tried to dismiss it at first, convinced it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Emily had always been there for him, his rock, his constant companion. But recently, she'd become distant, her smiles a little less genuine, her touch a little colder. Their conversations had become sparse, and when they did talk, they were about mundane things, nothing of substance, nothing that made him feel connected to her anymore. Jack wanted to believe it was just a phase, that everything would go back to normal once she returned, but deep down, he knew something had changed. She hadn't just drifted away emotionally, she had physically stepped out of their marriage. It had been a few hours since Jack had received the text from the private investigator he hired. The report he'd received was chilling, laying out in stark detail Emily's movements over the past few days, places she had been, things she had done, and worst of all, the name of the man she was with. Jack had tried to brush it off at first, thinking the investigator had to be mistaken. But as he read the report again, the truth began to seep into him. Emily was with another man. The woman he loved, the woman he had built his life around, was out there betraying him. His chest tightened, and for the first time, the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface broke free. His hands shook as he read the final lines of the report. There was no mistaking it. She was at a hotel, in room 312. Her phone had pinged a few times, and the investigator had tracked her movements, confirming Jack's worst fear. He put the phone down, his fingers still trembling, but his mind was made up. He couldn't wait anymore. Emily's actions spoke louder than any excuses she could offer. The lies, the deception, it had all gone on long enough. He had been patient, he had loved her fiercely, but now with the truth staring him in the face, he realized it was time for him to walk away. Jack glanced at the empty side of the bed again, and a wave of finality washed over him. This wasn't just about Emily's betrayal. It was about reclaiming his own life, a life that had been consumed by her actions. His eyes flickered to the clock. Time was slipping away, and he had wasted enough of it. Jack stood up, his body stiff with resolve, and walked out of the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. His mind raced, the storm of emotions inside him pulling him in different directions, but one thing was clear. He couldn't stay here any longer. He was done. Jack didn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, too quiet. The silence that used to comfort him now felt suffocating. His mind replayed the moments he had shared with Emily, their wedding day, their vacations, their plans for the future. It all seemed like a cruel joke now. Jack couldn't help but feel foolish for ever believing in her. All those years, all that trust, gone in an instant. He stumbled to the kitchen the next morning, his body aching from the lack of sleep, but he didn't feel the physical pain. It was the emotional pain that gnawed at him. He poured himself a cup of coffee, his hands shaking as he stared at the black liquid. The house still felt empty, even though he was there. The house that had once been full of laughter, of shared moments, now felt hollow. Jack's gaze drifted out the window, his eyes staring blankly at the city below. He had spent so many months pretending everything was fine, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Now, standing here in the silence of his apartment, Jack realized the truth. Emily had been slipping away for months, and he had allowed it. He had ignored the signs, hoping it was just a rough patch, hoping things would get better. But now, he was done. He couldn't wait for her to come back and offer him more excuses. He couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. Jack grabbed his jacket, not even bothering to lock the door behind him as he left the apartment. This was the end. It was time to confront Emily, to confront the version of himself that had allowed all of this to happen. The man who had believed her lies, the man who had waited blindly for her to come back. That man was gone, and he wasn't coming back. The city felt cold as Jack walked through the streets, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts, the early morning air biting at his skin. But he didn't care. He wasn't looking back, not anymore. He was done being the man who waited, the man who second-guessed his worth. He was ready to face the truth, to face Emily, to face himself, Jack reached his car, the engine roaring to life as he pulled out onto the road. The city around him blurred into nothingness, and for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel lost. He felt like he was in control. This wasn't just about confronting Emily. It was about reclaiming his life. He didn't know what he was going to do when he reached the Jefferson Hotel. He didn't know how he was going to handle the confrontation. But one thing was certain. Emily's betrayal had changed everything. The man who had loved her, the man who had trusted her with everything, was gone. And in his place was someone new, someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down. As Jack pulled into the parking lot of the Jefferson Hotel, his heart raced. He knew this was it, the final confrontation. The truth would finally come out, and there was no going back. Jack stepped out of the car, his footsteps heavy on the pavement as he made his way into the hotel. The lobby felt strangely empty, the receptionist too absorbed in her work to notice him as he walked past her. Jack didn't stop to ask for directions. He knew exactly where he was going. Room 312. The number burned into his mind. His hand gripped the elevator button as it dinged, the sound echoing in the quiet space. When the doors opened, Jack stepped inside, his heart pounding, his breath shallow. He was no longer the man he had been. He had crossed the point of no return, and as he ascended to the third floor, he knew there was no going back. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Jack walked down the hall with purpose. Every step he took brought him closer to the moment of truth, the moment when he would finally confront Emily. He stopped in front of room 312, the voices inside growing louder, muffled laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. He gripped the door handle, his fingers trembling. This was it. Jack stood in front of the door, the sounds from inside growing clearer with every passing second. Laughter, casual conversation. His breath hitched as the realization settled in. She was with him, the man she had been sneaking around with, the man who had taken Jack's place. The weight of it crushed him, the betrayal so sharp it left him breathless. His mind screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, but he couldn't. He wouldn't. With one final breath, Jack turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the bedside lamp. Emily was sitting on the bed, laughing at something the man next to her had said. The room felt foreign to Jack, the intimacy, the closeness they shared. The man was leaning in, his hand brushing her back in a gesture Jack had once reserved for her. His stomach twisted, but he couldn't look away. He had to see it, had to confront it all. The stranger in the room looked up, his face registering surprise at the sight of Jack standing in the doorway. Emily froze, her smile slipping as she turned to face him. Her eyes widened in shock, then flickered with guilt. But Jack didn't need to see that anymore. He wasn't interested in her excuses or the words she would attempt to offer. It didn't matter anymore. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the weight of the moment hanging thick in the air. Emily's eyes flickered between Jack and the man beside her, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jack didn't move. He stood frozen, his body tense with a mix of rage and sorrow. "Really, Jack?" His voice was cold, almost too calm, the kind of calm that comes before the storm. "Is this how it ends, Emily? In a hotel room with him?" Her face drained of color as she slowly stood up, her hand fidgeting nervously. She took a few unsteady steps toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, She trailed off, her words unable to fill the chasm between them. The apologies, the regret, the guilt, none of it mattered now. None of it could change what had already happened. Jack stood still, his heart racing, but his face hard. "You really think I'm going to sit here and let you explain yourself? After everything you've done? After everything we've been through?" His voice was controlled, but there was a darkness in it that made Emily freeze. She took another step toward him, as if she could close the gap between them with her presence alone. "Jack, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was just a mistake, a stupid mistake." Jack held up a hand to silence her. He didn't want to hear it, not anymore. He had heard enough lies, enough excuses to last a lifetime. He wasn't the same man who had waited for her all these months. He wasn't the man who had believed in her anymore. That man was dead, and standing here before her was the person he had become in the wake of her betrayal. The man who was done being patient, done being forgiving, done being the fool. "You think you can just walk away from this, Emily?" Jack's voice was steady now, cutting through the room with precision. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't see the woman he loved. He saw the woman who had broken him. You think you can do this to me and walk back into my life like nothing happened? You think I'll just sit around waiting for you to come back?" Emily's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes, but Jack wasn't interested in her tears. He wasn't interested in her regret. He had nothing left to give her, not after everything she had done. He was done with her, with their past, with the lie that had been their marriage. "You're not going to get a second chance this time, Emily," Jack said, his voice low but unwavering. "You don't get to do this to me and then think I'll take you back. This isn't a mistake. This is a choice you made, and now I'm making mine." He turned away from her, walking toward the door. The man who had been sitting on the bed remained still, watching Jack with a mixture of confusion and hesitation. Jack didn't even spare him a glance. He wasn't here for the stranger. He was here for Emily. Before he reached the door, he turned back. "You can keep whatever you think you have with him," he said, his voice cold. "But know this, Emily. I'm done. I'm done pretending. Done with this lie, and done with you." With those words, he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The sound echoed in his chest, as if it were a physical blow. His heart pounded as he stepped into the hallway, but the anger he had been holding onto for so long, began to fade into something else, something darker. He had come here to confront her, to stand up for himself, but now, as the reality of the situation sank in, he knew something needed to change. His entire world had been turned upside down, and it was time to make her understand just how deeply she had betrayed him. Jack walked down the hall, his footsteps heavy, his mind racing with a singular purpose. He wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about confronting Emily. This was about taking control, taking back everything she had stolen from him. When he reached the elevator, he pressed the button, his hands still trembling. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the anticipation of what he was about to do. As the elevator doors opened, he stepped inside, his gaze fixed on the mirrored wall. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him, but he didn't care. That man, the man who had loved Emily, the man who had trusted her, was gone. This man, the one who was standing in front of the mirrored reflection, was someone new, someone stronger. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, each floor passing slowly, but Jack didn't take his eyes off the door. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Jack stepped out, his steps purposeful, his mind focused. He wasn't going to let Emily think she could just walk away from him. She had chosen to betray him, and now it was time for her to feel the consequences. Jack walked out into the lobby and made his way straight to the front desk. The receptionist looked up briefly, offering a polite smile, but Jack didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to speak to the manager," he said, his voice firm. The receptionist blinked, taken aback by his tone, but quickly nodded and gestured toward the back of the room. The manager appeared shortly after, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a professional demeanor. "How can I help you, sir?" he asked. Jack didn't waste time with formalities. "I want to change the name on the reservation for room 312. I'm checking out now," he said, his voice cold. The manager raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. You'll need authorization from the guest who made the reservation." Jack's lips curled into a thin smile, a dangerous one. "You see, there's a problem," he said, his tone dripping with an edge of malice. "The guest who made that reservation is no longer in control of her life. I am." Without waiting for a response, Jack turned and walked out of the hotel. His mind was set, and there was no going back. He wasn't just leaving. He wasn't just walking away from Emily. He was taking everything she had taken from him. His dignity, his pride, and his love. It was his turn now. As Jack left the hotel and stepped into the cold night air, he felt something inside him snap into place. He had taken control of his life, but it wasn't enough. He needed to make sure Emily understood the consequences of her actions. He wasn't just walking away from her. He was making sure she couldn't walk back into his life without consequences. Jack drove back to the apartment, every turn, every stop filled with a renewed sense of power. By the time he reached the building, the fire inside him had transformed into a chilling calmness. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming his life. He walked straight to their apartment. He didn't knock, didn't wait. This time, he was the one in control. When Emily opened the door, her eyes were wide with surprise, and Jack saw the guilt still written all over her face. But there was no pity, no sympathy in his expression. "Pack your things," he said, his voice ice cold. "You're leaving now." Emily's face twisted in confusion. "Jack, please no." "You made your choice, Emily. Now you'll deal with the consequences. Jack interrupted. He didn't want to hear her apologies, her excuses. She had no power over him anymore. I want you out of here tonight. With that, he turned and walked out, not looking back. Emily's desperate calls followed him, but he ignored them. He was done. He wasn't the man who had loved her blindly anymore. He was someone stronger, someone who could finally walk away from the wreckage of his past. The world felt different now. Jack was free, truly free for the first time in years. He had walked through fire and come out on the other side. Whatever came next, he would face it on his terms.